Okay, recording has started. Okay, I do have more division updates than I had anticipated, so I'll be taking some time to talk about that. Then I'll provide you with the 2023 NRS data, some of that, not all of it, but some of the NRS data from last program year. And then I did a little bit of number crunching to see the impact of post-testing, or probably more accurately, not post-testing, on our measurable skill gains. So first of all, I would like to announce that as of the beginning of November, we have a new clerical assistant. Her name is Lauren Moyer. And she is doing a lot of work to support our team. One of the things that she does is send out emails on my behalf. And so if you see an email from Lauren Moyer, it's probably coming on my behalf, and don't delete it. At least don't delete it before you read it. So welcome, Lauren. We're very happy to have you on our team. This had kind of come up in I think some discussions with advisors, and we talked about it in a meeting. And it's the idea of using remote instruction for, I'm putting in their snow days. So sometimes there are situations in which a class that is an in-person class, it's not a hybrid class, it's not a high flex class, it's an in-person class, but you have bad weather, and you decide, instead of just canceling class, to run a remote instruction class so that you can provide services instead of canceling, but students don't have to come out in the bad weather. And that's fine. You can do that. I think a couple things to keep in mind when you're doing that is you want to make sure that the teacher is prepared to be able to teach remote instruction effectively. I think one of the things that we all learned from the pandemic is that remote instruction needs to be done right in order to be useful and beneficial for both the teacher and the students. And that if you anticipate needing to do that, you'll want to prepare the students ahead of time so that they're prepared to log on to either Zoom or Teams or whatever software that you use. But that is something that's perfectly fine to do it. You just want to make sure that it's done in a way that's useful for both the teachers and the students and not frustrating. So we've been hearing some confusion about the timing of assessments and what we have in our policy versus what is possible within the eData system. So I wanted to kind of review those key aspects. So our policy is, when you have students come to you, new students come to you for service, our policy is that you assess them before they start class. Right? That's the policy. Now, and our policy says that all programs must have procedures in place to ensure that they pre-test all students, including students in distance education, before the students begin instruction. Right? Now, eData will allow you to enter an assessment that is dated up to 30 days after a student's current year start date, because we recognize that there are very occasional cases in which a student may start class before they're assessed. You might have a student who shows up with a family member to their ESL class, and they want to do ESL class, and that's the class that they're going to go to. So you allow them to attend a class or two before you get them an assessment. But those should be very few and far between. You are expected to assess students before they start class. That 30 days afterwards is an exception, and that assessment has to be given within 30 days of the student's start date. If it is dated more than 30 days after the student's start date, you will be able to enter the assessment into eData, but the students will not have, the system will not assign the students an entry level because the assessment is not considered valid. Okay? In 23-24, there were 217 adults with no entry level due to having a pretest dated more than 30 days after the start date. As of November 27th this year, we already had 111 students who had assessments in eData that were dated, their quote unquote pretest, their first assessment for this year was dated more than 30 days after the student's current year program start date, or current year start date, sorry, and therefore do not have a valid pretest. Now, for NRS reporting, we have to report those individuals. Like we have to report everyone who hits 12 hours of service. And so we have to put them in some kind of educational functioning level. We place them in the lowest, either ABE or ESL level, depending on which service they're in. But they can't show an EFL gain because they don't have a valid pretest, right? So it is important that you assess the people in a timely fashion before they start class, and for the very few exceptions, as soon as possible after they've started class, but no later than 30 days out. Now, there is one formal exception to that, which is related to students, English learners, who are being assessed with the CASAS steps. CASAS has the CASAS intake screening process for steps, which programs may use with very low-level English learners to determine if a learner should bypass the appraisal or locator and go directly into a beginning level pretest. And learners who demonstrate great difficulty with that screening process. So you use a process, this screening process, to say, okay, we know that this person should just go straight into the beginning level pretest. Their skills aren't high enough to go into one of the higher level pretests. But if you have a learner who is really struggling even to do that screening process, those students may participate in instructional activities for up to 12 hours before taking the beginning level pretest. Now, they don't have to, right? So you may use this screening process, and for those very low level English learners who are demonstrating great difficulty with the screening process, you may allow them to participate in instructional activities for up to 12 hours before you give them that assessment, but you don't have to. Okay, so I did want to clarify that. Then for continuing students, so the students who they were in your program 23-24, they continued into 24-25. And it could either be at another agency or your own agency. Our policy and eData allow agencies to roll over an assessment that was given within 150 days before the current year start date. Now, you're not required to use those assessments, but you may. If you want to use them, you must roll them over in eData. Do not re-enter them in eData with a new date in the program year. Looking at eData, it looks like there are programs who are taking an assessment that, say, was given in April of 2024, and instead of rolling it over, they are re-entering it as if and giving it like an administration date of August 2024. So there's two things wrong with that. One, for most students, that's now more than, if it's a continuing student, it's now more than 30 days past their current year start date, because their current year start date would have been July 1st. And two, it's the wrong date. That's not the date the assessment was given. So if you want to use an assessment that was given in the prior program year and it falls within that 150 days and you feel that it's an appropriate assessment for the student, and of course it's a valid assessment from last year. So for example, you can't roll over a math goals from last year because the math goals is no longer valid. But if it's a valid assessment in the current program year, it was given within 150 days before the current year start date, and you want to use it, you need to do the rollover process in eData.
Amanda, may I ask a question?
Sure.
I had a question about the previous slide and the snow days. So if students are in a face-to-face class, they're not going to be marked as being distance learners. So if we do have a situation where a face-to-face class goes remote for a day, would we just say that those hours were face-to-face?
Yeah, I think if it's
Okay.
like a one-off, yes, I think that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. And then the other question I had about the CASAS steps. Um, my understanding is that CASAS has indicated that if a student does not achieve a reportable score and they kind of test out of range, that it's acceptable to use the lowest score available and use that for reporting purposes.
Yes, we just I'd have to double check the email that we got from them. They did say something about having an agreement with Octave around allowing lowest scores or something. So yes, that is my
Okay.
understanding. If you
Okay.
got a notification from CASAS about that, that is the case. And I checked with Michael, and we feel like eData should allow whatever this new option is that CASAS is saying.
Okay. Thank you.
Amanda, there is a question in the chat.
Okay, so
Um,
I can go ahead and read it. Thank you, Mary.
uh-huh.
If we want to reassess for the new year and not roll anything over, that is okay as long as we use the alternate form, no matter if the previous test was a post-test okay. And then you say, and the student had no hours between that test and the new pretest. Okay, there's a difference between what you're allowed to do and what good policy or good practice is. It is not good practice to reassess somebody after no hours of instruction, right? That's over assessing a student. There's no point in doing that. If you have a test from the prior year that was their post test, and that student is continuing with you, why would you want to give them another test a couple months later if they haven't gotten any more instruction? Okay, I think that's something you would want to talk to your program about how to address, rather than having constant breaks in instruction. Look at ways that you can provide ongoing services. That's why we say you need to make year-round services available. I mean, so the answer is yes, technically you can give a student a new pretest every year. I don't think that that's best practice. I don't think it's best for the student. Um, so, but it's allowable. And of course, in cases where the prior year assessment, so for example, many of the ESL assessments along with table 11, 12 and CASAS goals, and this is going to be on the next slide, I think, are expiring and on June 30th of 2025. And so if you give them one of those at the end of the program year, and then you're going to have to reassess them at the beginning of the new program year, because you will not be allowed to roll those over because they're no longer valid. They're no longer, I'm sorry, they're no longer approved for reporting purposes. So I kind of mentioned this in the answer to the last question. Just some reminders that this is a transition year for TABE. DRC has said that the TABE 1314 online testing will be available in January. Paper testing will be available in April. We are allowing TABE 1314, but you do not have to start using it immediately. We are working on getting TABE 1314 added to eData so that when you start using it, you will be able to enter it. I think that's very close to being done. And we're still trying to determine if new training will be needed or if staff who are up to date with TABE 1112 training will be okay to administer 1314 without new training. We're still looking into that to see what the policy will be around the training. But that TABE should be coming soon, according to DRC. The CASAS reading goals is due to expire. Octave calls it sunsetting on June 30th of 2025. CASAS has submitted a CASAS reading goals 2 to Octave for review. Octave has not yet announced its approval of reading goals 2, which means we haven't approved it yet because we can't approve it until Octave approves it. Once we are notified that Octave has approved it, we anticipate approving it, but again, we would have to wait until it gets added to eData before programs can use it, and we'd have to see what CASAS plans to do about training for the reading goals to see if they are requiring any different training than for the reading goals that we have now. So we'll keep you up to date as we get information. Okay, there is a question. If we have post-tested in CASAS Life and Work, which is valid until 12/31/24, should we be giving CASAS steps as a new pretest in order to be able to measure progress and get EFL and steps version, even though it will not be within the first 30 days of attendance? Okay, a couple things to clarify. We had originally said that the assessments that will be ending this year, we as a state had originally said you could only use them through December 31st. We did change the policy at the beginning of this program year, so you can use the assessments that are expiring this year. You are allowed to use them through the end of the program year. I'm actually let me bring up the web page. Oops, that's not what I want. Okay, so if any of you have been to the Division of Adult Education, the Department of Education, our division pages, the new administration has changed layouts. There were some issues with how things got transitioned, but I believe they've been corrected. So this is now where you go to the policies. And they now, I believe, are up to date. So policy D100. So here on page 3, we've kind of given our thoughts, our guidance on how to handle the transition. So we are allowing you to use these assessments that are expiring through the program year. You don't. So if you have someone who you need to post test in January, whose rolled over assessment is the CASAS Life and Work Reading, you can post-test them in January with CASAS Life and Work Reading. So what we have for these students who are continuing, we have numbers 2 and 3. So for learners continuing from program year 23-24 who have valid assessments that can be rolled over into 2024-25 and are likely to continue into the program year or into program year 25-26, agencies may, so we give you the options, roll over valid assessments from 23-24, post-test with an alternate form of the old version, and then transition to the new version, or administer the new version as the pre-test. Laura, the second part of your question, you said, even though it will not be within the first 30 days of attendance, that is okay because you still have a first administration of a valid assessment in the program year that was within 30 days of their current year start date. So yes, you're okay with that. I see what your question is, and yes, you should be okay. And if not, then that would be something we'd have to talk to the eData team about. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, Laura. I was kind of that last part of it. I hadn't processed correctly until I got towards the end of my answer. So, yes, even though it's the first administration of a new assessment, and that's happening more than 30 days after the first day of attendance, it should still be fine because it's not the first assessment they're getting for the year. Okay, incentive funds. The division got a waiver to use unexpended state funds from 23-24 in 24-25, and we will be using them as incentive funds. Before I go any further with that, though, I would like to let you know that while it is nice to be able to get the waiver to use unexpended state funds from a prior year as incentive funds, my budget office has told me that they get repeated questions from the governor's budget office about why our programs are not spending their money. Now, we all know that adult education is different from most other education in that you have a largely part-time staff, and that, when they don't work, they don't get paid, that it is challenging to find employees. And so you budget for employees, but it might be hard to find someone. And, you're not spending money on benefits because they're part-time teachers. I understand all that. I try to explain it to them. But they are noticing that money is not getting spent. And so when I ask for more money in our line item, they question it. So while it's nice to have unexpended funds, when it comes to state funds, please use them up as much as you can. It's fine to return a couple hundred, maybe $1,000, but we do have people returning 10, 15, 20, $30,000, and that gets questioned and is used as a reason not to increase our line item. That said, we do have incentive funds for this year. We will be using 24-25 data that have been entered in eData prior to January 1st. So you have until December 31st to get as much data in as you want to be there for the purposes of incentive funding, which should in fact be all of the data you have up through tomorrow, since 14 days. But anyway, agencies that have achieved 55% of contracted enrollment based on that data will be eligible to receive a dollar amount per student that shows an EFL gain or earns a high school equivalency credential. The EFL gains can be based on pre-post testing, passing a high school equivalency subtest, or documented enrollment in post-secondary education or training. The dollar amount is per student, not per outcome. So a student who shows an EFL gain based on passing an HSE subtest and also earns an HSE credential counts as 1, not 2. And the actual dollar amount per student will be based on the funds available to us, the number of agencies that achieve the 55% of contracted enrollment, and the number of students who achieve one of the listed outcomes. Unlike last year, we will not be awarding incentive funds simply for enrollment. So agencies that do not achieve 55% of contracted enrollment will not be eligible for any incentive funds. I'm sorry, it looks like we had a question that I missed previously. We started post-testing using CASAS skills with learners who had CASAS goals. And they are not showing as post-tested since the administrator reflects 1, non-administrator 2. Yes, that is because CASAS goals is not a post-test for life and work. You can't combine, you can't pair the versions. So CASAS goals is not a post-test for CASAS life and work skills, life and work. So if you rolled over a CASAS life and work, you have to, and you want to post-test them, you must post-test them with CASAS life and work. And then assess them, if you anticipate they're continuing into next year and you want to have an assessment that will be valid next year, you will need to have the next assessment be the CASAS goals, which would not pair with the life and work, and you can't show an EFL gain. I hope that that's clear.
Yep.
Okay, and I have a couple questions about incentive funds. Yes, the 55% is for that particular grant. So, for the 064 grant, if you're at 55% of contracted enrollment for the 064 grant, you'd be eligible for the students who are in the 064 grant. If you are at 55% for your 259, then you would, actually, I'm not sure that we're going to do it for that, but and then for 054. 061 is not eligible for incentive funds because those are federal funds only. They don't have any state funds. And they all get pretty good grant amounts anyway. For the 55%, for those of us with subgrantors, will you look at us individually or as one? It is one. It is by grant. Not by individual agency. Okay. So with all of the changes around the measurable skill gains and EFL gain options and things like that, I wanted to review measurable skill gain options that we use in Pennsylvania. At the kickoff, I reviewed all of the measurable skill gain options that are available in the national reporting system, but some of them really aren't used. We don't use them in Pennsylvania. So this slide is a reminder of what we use in Pennsylvania. As a reminder, for state reporting in the NRS, the National Reporting System, students must have a measurable skill gain in each of their periods of participation. So the most common way for adult educations to demonstrate measurable skill gain is through educational functioning level gain during the program year. There are 3 ways that a student in Pennsylvania can achieve an EFL gain. Through a matching pre and post test pair, and that can be on any matching pair. But kind of going back to the question that we had from a person, it has to be on the same assessment, right? So it has to be, if you're using CASAS life and work reading as the pre-test, you have to use CASAS life and work reading as the post-test. You can't use like CASAS steps as a post-test for the life and work, right? So it has to be on the same alternate form of the same assessment. The second way is the student enrolls in post-secondary education or training after starting adult education and during the program year. The change there that Octay made in June was that the student no longer has to exit adult education. So prior to June, it was the student exited adult education and then enrolled in post-secondary education. Now you can show an EFL gain, the student, by enrolling in post-secondary education or training. They can continue to be in adult education or they can have exited either one of those. And we use the post-secondary enrollment verification forms for those. And finally, a student can earn an EFL gain by passing a subtest of the high school equivalency exam after starting adult education. Then there are two other ways that students can show measurable skill gain that we use in Pennsylvania. One is that they achieve a high school equivalency credential. The nice thing about the high school equivalency attainment is that for the few students who have multiple periods of participation, that high school equivalency credential counts as a measurable skill gain for all of the periods of participation that the student had prior to passing the test. So if the student had 2 periods of participation, they attended a couple, they attended 25 hours from August through October, and then they returned to your program in February and attended through May, and then they passed their high school equivalency test. For our federal reporting, that high school equivalency test means that they showed a measurable skill gain in both of those periods of participation. Passing a subtest of a high school equivalency test does not do that. That has to happen within a particular period of participation. So in the case I just gave, the example, if you still have a student who attends August through October, and then returns February through April and passes the math portion of the test, but does not earn the credential yet, that is, for Pennsylvania, an EFL gain, measurable skill gain, in that second period of participation, but the individual does not have a measurable skill gain in the first one. And then the last bullet here is specific for students who are in workplace literacy classes or integrated education and training activities. And keep in mind, the workplace literacy class is one that happens at a work site specific to an employer, developed with the employer's needs and customized to their needs. The employer, if the employer determines benchmarks and milestones that those individuals have to meet, and they meet those, that is a measurable skill gain. For students who are in an IET, if they pass an occupational exam, that can be a measurable skill gain. For the incentive funds, which options are available to demonstrate an EFL gain? We are doing our best to use all of them. But it doesn't matter how many individual student has, this individual student only counts as one. But we will be looking, we are planning to look at high school equivalency subtests and post-secondary education or training. It is a lot more work than just figuring out the pre-post test, but we're going to try and include all of them. So one of the questions that we've gotten from a couple agencies who have students who have passed a subtest of the high school equivalency. And so I want to clarify a little bit. So passing a high school equivalency subtest means the student demonstrates an educational functioning level gain. An EFL gain is a measurable skill gain. Passing the high school equivalency exam and getting the credential is a measurable skill gain. But passing the high school equivalency subtest or passing the whole test is not a post-test for the standardized assessment you've given them. Right? So if you have a student, they came in, you gave them the math goals 2 as their pretest, and then they went and they took the math subtest of the GED test and they passed it. That's great. That is an EFL gain, but you have not post-tested the student. So then the question that we got, was, do I need to post-test a student who passed a high school equivalency subtest or a test? So let's say you have a student who comes in, they've already passed 3 of the 4 sections on the GED test. All they need to do is do math and pass the math test, and they've gotten their credential. So they come in, you assess them with math goals or TABE math, you place them in class, they work on math, they pass the math section, and they get their credential. You're like, okay, they've got a measurable skill gain or an EFL, they got a measurable skill gain. Do I have to post-test them? And the answer is it depends on the student's needs. If the student is now done, right? They're like, I got my high school equivalency. I got the job I want. Thank you so much. I'm out of here. Then no, you don't have to like try and find them to be able to get a post test in the hopes that they're going to show another EFL gain, right? Because they've already shown, for our selfish purposes, they've already shown a measurable skill gain. We got that outcome from them. So there's no benefit to the student to be post test, right? Because they're done. But you might have another student who comes in who is just beginning their journey towards passing the high school equivalency test. So they decide that they want to start with social studies, and you give them the reading, you give them both like the reading and the math, and you're working on things. They take the social studies subtest and they pass it. Well, they have demonstrated an EFL gain, right? We have an outcome for them, but that's not a post test. What's happening with that student after the fact, right? Do you want to also sit down and say, okay, part of the reason you were successful on the social studies subtest is because we've been working on your reading, and you've been doing this for 45 hours. Let's give you another CASAS reading or TABE reading to see where you are now and what more you need to do, right? Or things. So I put some questions here. Is there a reason for you and the student to see what progress the student has shown on a standardized assessment so that you know how to continue the services with them, and help them progress further? So that's kind of the answer. And the other thing is, are they going to enroll? Are they going to continue into next year? In which case they're going to need another pretest anyway, right? So there are those things. So we're not going to say you have to hunt down a student who's done with your program. They passed the high school equivalency test, they're done, they're off doing their thing. You don't have to try and find them to get a post test just to get a post test. But if the student's continuing in their program, there probably is a reason for you to assess them again, just as part of instruction and determining needs. If students are entering at NRS 6, they still need to post-test, correct? Well, so I assume are you talking about ABE level 6? Not ESL level 6, ABE, okay, thank you. So no, because they can't show an EFL gain by post-testing, right? We've always known that. A student who enrolls at ABE level 6 on, that if ABE level 6 is their lowest level on any assessment you give them, they're not going to be able to show an EFL gain based on pre-post testing because none of the assessments have that benchmark. So in that particular case, the question becomes, why is that student in the program? If they're in the program to pass the high school equivalency test, then they would be showing EFL gain or measurable skill gain by passing the test. Are they in your program? If they already have a high school diploma, are they in your program because they want to go on to post-secondary education or training, in which case that would be the way they show the measurable skill gain. So again, if you have somebody come in at level 6, you may want to post-test them to see if they've shown any progress and see if there's something you're missing that you want to help them continue to work on. But for the purposes of showing an educational functioning level gain, you're not going to get that from post-testing somebody at ABE level 6. I'm afraid I'm going to run out of time here, but that's okay. Those are good questions, and it's good to clarify those things. So our 23-24 NRS data. Participants, which is individuals with 12 or more hours of service, we had 16,575, which was an increase of 1,682, or 11.3% over 22-23. Individuals who walked through our doors who had less than 12 hours, last year was approximately a quarter of all the people who completed intakes had less than 12 hours. And that is down from 27.1%, which is a good trend. So of the people who are coming through our doors, more of them, a greater percentage of them are making it to the 12-hour threshold. Very interestingly, for the first time in Pennsylvania, over half of our participants were in the ESL levels. 54% of the students last year tested into ESL levels 1 through 6, and only 46 were in ABE. And that is the first time. 2022, 23, we were almost dead even. I think it was like maybe there 10 or 12 student difference between the two areas. But and this is actually very much in line with much of the rest of the country. Some states are at 60, 70% ESL. For measurable skill gains, this is good news. Our table 4, so our measurable skill gains for all periods of participation was 37.27% last year, which exceeded our target of 36%. It was an increase of 4 percentage points from last year, when our target was 35%. Now, this is the first time we have met our measurable skill gain target since WIOA started. So thank you. Good work last year. This is also the highest our measurable skill gain has been since 2018-19. However, it is not the highest measurable skill gain that we have had under WIOA. In 17-18 and 18-19, our measurable skill gain was almost 44%. But we're improving, so thank you, and we did exceed our target last year. Now, part of the improvement was the result of the fact that in June, Octay suddenly said, hey, you can count passing high school equivalency subtest as an EFL gain. So, suddenly there were students who maybe didn't show an EFL gain based on pre-post testing, but now they showed an EFL gain because they had passed a high school equivalency subtest. However, that did not account for all of the improvement. So while we saw while we saw a decrease in the percentage of all participants who had a post-test, so in 23-24, 52.7% of participants had a post-test versus 53.8% in 22-23. The table 4, so the percentage of students who post-tested who had an EFL gain was 60.23% last year, which was 3 percentage points higher than the prior year. So our overall measurable skill gain improvement was more the result of improved EFL gains based on post-testing than it was the addition of passing the high school equivalency subtest as an EFL gain. Heather Cecil, our research associate, has done some preliminary analysis and said that it's from what she's seeing, there were last year, in fact, very few students who passed an HSE subtest or the whole test who did not also have an EFL gain based on pre-post testing. Now, some of that may be because you ran out and post-tested people just so that you could get a post-test for them, because Octave didn't introduce the idea of high school equivalency subtest passage as an EFL gain until June 11th. But that was something interesting to know, that our preliminary data indicate, or preliminary analysis indicates that, you know, the improvement is mostly improvement in EFL gains based on pre-post testing. This is a table I'll let you look at on your own. This is includes the 23-24 data. This is a version of the table that I showed at the kickoff, just kind of showing some of our trends from 18-19. As you can see, the far right column is the percentage of adults with a post-test who showed an EFL gain, and we hit 60% again, which is the first time since 18-19. And, you know, as you can see, we're at our highest measurable skill gains since 18-19 as well. The other performance measures, employment in the second quarter after exit, our performance was 44.5%. Our target was 47.5. Fourth quarter, 46%. Our target was 49.5. Our median earnings was about 7,500. The target was 5,500, so we did significantly exceed that one. And the credential attainment, we were just under 25%, and our target is 37%. Now, WIOA has in it sanctions for states when programs, so the various core programs, don't meet their targets. They're related to that. There is a statistical adjustment model that the federal departments have to create, or have created and are developing and informing. Excuse me, that take into consideration actual conditions in the state during the program year, and they use it to adjust the targets to see if the state maybe actually did meet them when they look at the real situation. It's a very complicated process. The thing to know is right now for Title II, they're looking at our performance, but they are not applying sanctions based on not meeting targets, because they still don't have enough national data for Title II to feel confident that the statistical adjustment model is as accurate as they need it to be. So the fact that we have not hit our performance targets in these areas is not going to result in sanctions to Pennsylvania, but we do anticipate that that time will be coming in the next couple of years. This was just some interesting data. The students who are in distance education, the table that we report distance education students on, we count anyone who has 12 or more hours of distance education, regardless of how many overall hours they have. If they have 12 or more hours of distance education, we report them on the table. Participation as a percentage of students is down. But those students who are receiving distance education average about 17 more hours per student than those who are not. And their measurable skill gain is, good, almost 4 points higher. So just some interesting data. Last slide, I've got 4 minutes. In 23-24, we had almost 1,700 students who had the minimum instructional hours to be post-tested, but did not have a post-test. It's approximately 10% of the participants. There were 211 who had 80 or more hours and no post-test, who tested at EFL levels other than ABE level 6. There's 211 people with 80 or more hours who, so what I have to clarify, they did not have a post-test in eData. So the agency may have post-tested them, but they didn't get entered, or the agency didn't post-test them. If all of those 211 people had in fact been post-tested, and 60% of them showed a gain, which is in line with our table 4B, that would have been 126 more EFL gains, and our measurable skill gain would have been 38% instead of 37.27%, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but when it comes to statistical adjustment models and meeting targets, can actually be fairly significant. I then did some quick analysis, and if we looked at the rest of those 1,668 students and said, okay, let's say just a portion of those had in fact been post-tested and shown an EFL gain. So I said, let's say a little less than a quarter of those. We had gotten 350 additional EFL gains from those 1,400 remaining students. Our measurable skill gain would have been about 40%. So it really is, I understand that there's always going to be students who you just don't get post-tested. And some of those students may in fact have showed an EFL gain based on passing a high school equivalency subtest. But many of those students were ESL students who are very unlikely to be taking the high school equivalency test. They may be, there may be some taking it in Spanish. But, those of you who are not tracking your students as well as you should be and not getting post-tests, or who are not getting your post-tests entered, that's something you really, really need to look at, because you are impacting not only your own agency's performance, but the state's performance as well. And what I will say is, at the national level, we do not have an enrollment target. The federal government doesn't say to Pennsylvania, you have to have an X number of participants. We don't have targets for enrollment. We have targets for the outcomes of the people that we enroll. So it is important that when you have students who reach the number of hours to be post-tested, that you begin looking at them and determine if it is appropriate to post-test them and get that post-test done and entered for our purposes. Again, with the caveats we talked about recently, for those, if you have someone who passed the high school equivalency test and has now left your program and gone on to their next steps in life, for that student, that post-test isn't valid, and they've actually, for our purposes, only already shown an EFL gain. But I think there are a lot of students out there who could be showing EFL gains based on pre-post testing, because that's the service that they're getting, and they're just not being assessed, or the assessment is not being entered. Octave has not yet released an updated version for 23-24 of the fancy spreadsheet that Christine showed you back in February. I am hoping that they'll be coming out with an updated version of that we'll be able to show you sometime in the spring. That is it. Level 1. Can I let us know the total? I don't know it off the top of my head. It's a fairly significant amount. I think it's definitely over $1 million. Which means, I'd like to, yes, definitely happy face. I see that, Tim. But the other thing is that means that programs are not spending $1 million. And that's what the governor's budget office sees. They see that our agencies aren't spending money. So I realize that there are many of you out there who do spend every penny that you get. So this isn't for all of you, but especially for your state funds, please return as little state funding as possible, because they do notice that and they ask about it. And I have that all on recording, right? So, okay. Well, if there are no more questions, again, to those of you who are retiring, who are on this, congratulations. Thank you so much for your time and your dedication, and please have a wonderful retirement. And for everyone else, have a wonderful holiday season, and we will talk to you in January.
Happy holidays to everyone.